Welcome to our session 2 presentation, Balancing the Use of Digital Technologies for Developmentally Appropriate Practice. I'd like to welcome Amanda. Amanda Macdonald is an Early Childhood Liaison Officer for ELA, the Early Learning Languages Australia program. As part of the ELA team, Amanda delivers workshops and professional learning and supports educators as they engage in language experiences and digital technology. With a Master of Education in Special Education and over 20 years experience teaching preschoolers, Amanda is passionate about inclusive education. She's mindful of supporting the differing needs of individual children, teachers and preschools. Just a few housekeeping reminders before we get started. We've all been muted to start. If you have any questions for Amanda, please write them in the chat box and I'll be monitoring the chat box and letting Amanda know when we have questions coming in and out. It is being videoed, our session here, so you'll get a chance to look at it next time or later on. You'll be sent a link to it. Down the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions button that if you agree with something, you can give a little hands clap or a thumbs up as well. You can unmute yourself if you need to speak by pressing and holding down the space bar, so you can speak and ask questions. But I said at the moment, prefer to put your questions in on the in the chat box so we can do it, because just to allow it's easier for our filming of it, mainly focus on Amanda at the moment. All right, Amanda, are we ready to begin?
I think so. Thanks, Liz. And hello and welcome everyone to this presentation to look at balancing the use of digital technologies for developmentally appropriate learning. My name's Amanda Macdonald, as Liz said, and I'm the Early Childhood Liaison Officer at Education Services Australia. And Education Services Australia is proud to join more than 1,000 organisations across Australia in developing a reconciliation action plan in partnership with Reconciliation Australia. So before I begin, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we all work and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. And I acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who continue to contribute to our work to improve learning and education. And I acknowledge the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which I work in Melbourne. So let's look at digital technology. So technology changes at a really rapid rate. What was once impractical or simply too expensive is now commonplace in most people's lives. And technology has changed our social lives, our workplaces, our careers, our businesses. There's very little that advancing technology has not affected. Now, the iPad was released in 2010, so the preschoolers that we're teaching now do not know a world before touchscreen devices. So, of course, we all have our own personal philosophy about the use of technology in preschool. You may feel that children learn best through nature play and natural materials, or you may feel that every child should have access to their own devices. So now we're all just going to have a little bit of a think. Do you believe there is a place for technology in early childhood education? Have a think, look at this image and think, whereabouts on this line is your own personal view? So do you think it should all be natural materials, just natural materials, no man-made products? That's what children should be using. Or perhaps you think that all children should have access to technology, touchscreen devices and things like that. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle, like most people. There should be a really good balance. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So there are many reasons to use technology and many reasons why technology has been regarded as an important part of education from early childhood right through to post-secondary education. And here are a few. From using technology as a creative tool to developing skills in responsibility, it helps children to become prepared and equipped with skills for life in the community. And during the COVID-19 crisis, this is where a lot of these things really came into play, when educators and preschool teachers were really thinking about how they could maintain connections, because that's what we're all about in preschool, maintaining connections and really getting that sense of belonging for children and for their families. And come term 2, when children were staying at home, how are we going to keep that up? One of the teachers in Queensland started Zoom sessions. So she had some children at preschool and some were self-isolating at home, and they would do their group times through Zoom so that all the children in the preschool could say hello to their friends at home and vice versa. And then they ran little sessions like science, experiments, songs, stories and things through those Zoom sessions with the children at home. And then we've got another picture there. Jo created a YouTube channel so that she was learning another language, so she could speak some words and phrases in that new language so that families could practice those at home with their children. And they reported that the children felt really connected because they were seeing their own teacher showing them things and practicing things with them. Janelle here was completely overwhelmed. She had heard stories that the children were missing preschool and were really wanting to see her and her other educators. So she started a Facebook page and called it Storytime in Sunbury, where she lives. And the children were logging into this Facebook page and having stories read to them via that. And it turned out that the whole community was becoming involved and children all over were joining in, as far away as Ireland, joining in to listen to those story times that she was running. And so her sense of connections really, really grew through that and using that online platform of Facebook. But where does technology fit into the early years learning framework? So while for many technology use in preschools is still quite new, it has been included in the EYLF for almost 10 years. So technology use could really relate to many of the outcome 4 points, but probably the most obvious connection is that point in outcome 4, children resource their own learning through connecting with people, place, technologies, and natural and processed materials. And of course, it directly relates to many of the outcome 5 points, particularly the final point here, that children use information and communication technologies to access information, investigate ideas, and represent their thinking. So what tends to happen in early childhood is that we tend to take a stance on the use of technology with children. And what that means is we end up arguing with each other. So some people think that technology is fantastic. It's wonderful. It gives us all these wonderful opportunities and we can do things that we have never been able to do before. While others think it's bad for children. It saps them of their creativity. They won't go outside to play and they're all getting fat. What we need to do is start to think about what technology we use and how we use it. So there's the instrumental theory that technology is neutral, has no value of its own. It's a tool for the purpose of the user. And you see this when teachers say, I use technology with the children. I use it to Google, to look things up, or we watch things on YouTube. So it's used as a tool. Then there's the substantive view where the emphasis is on the technology design. And so initially you get that wow factor. And then over time, it just seeps into our way of life. So think about the way you communicate with families. Remember, we used to handwrite notes and photocopy them and send them home. Then we could type them up. That was pretty cool. Type up our newsletters and send them home that way. Then we started emailing families and we thought, wow, no more newsletters left in the bottom of the children's pockets or the bottom of their kinder bags. Now we can email families directly. We don't have to worry about the paper. We don't think, wow, email's amazing anymore. It's just part of our lives. Now we're starting to think, wow, look, we've got an app. We don't even have to worry about just text. We can use our app to send home images of what the children are doing and pictures of things that they're doing during the day. And then that, again, will just become part of our lives. And then there's the critical view where we're looking at the power and the value of the technology. So not just thinking about what is, but what could be. And this is what guided the Australian government in the development of the ALA apps, in thinking about, wow, what can technology do that we can then use? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So think about your own practice. You might want to take a little note to yourself or just think about technology that you use with the preschoolers. Do you use technology? What tech do you use? Is it teacher-led like YouTube or Google? Or is it student-led, where the students take photos of themselves or use play-based apps? How does that fit in with your philosophy of play-based learning? Think about, what does play-based learning mean to you? How's that fit with digital stuff? We're going to have a quick look at the statement on young children and digital technologies, and this was published by Early Childhood Australia, and you can see the link there on your screen. Or if you haven't seen it, perhaps you've read it, perhaps you're thinking, gosh, I didn't know that existed. It is a fantastic thing to look at. If you haven't already seen it, please go away and have a look because it is amazing. You might have contributed some ideas to that document. It is quite long, as you can see there, it is quite long, but it is really worth the look. And it does look at several different areas. So we've got relationships, health and well-being, citizenship and play and pedagogy. And because it is such a long document, they did come up with this gorgeous little thing, a statement on young children and digital technologies, a summary. And this is just a fold out brochure like this. Maybe if I hold it up there, that just outlines all of the different points. Really easy to pop up on your wall, just as a quick reference if you want, or if you're talking to parents or talking to other educators about digital technology with kids. So a really great document to have a look at. And we'll have a look at some of the aspects of this document. The first one is relationships. So what we're looking at is young children's relationships with adults and peers matter in digital contexts. So think about how adults model the self-regulated tech use. How are your families modeling that with their children? How are you modeling that to children? How are you modeling self-regulation? Perhaps you're using things like timers, which we can talk about later, times, areas, all of those sorts of things in your room where you can use tech. And then thinking about building that understanding and the regulated use of technology. So thinking about how your children are accessing technology, making sure it is play-based, making sure that there is a time limit in your own mind, or that you're encouraging the children to self-regulate that time on the devices. And then you need to think about ensuring that when you're with another person, the focus is on the relationship. Some of you may already have developed policies around this, and you can develop policies to work with families to make those decisions. So it's okay to have a policy where you are saying to your families, there is no tech at pick up and drop off time. Pick up and drop off time at our centre is a phone-free zone. And you can actually buy posters that look like those old no smoking signs, except it's got a phone. So it's a no phone zone. And you might develop that policy and say, look, your children haven't seen you all day. They're busting to talk to you about the things that they've been doing. We don't want you on your phone when you're coming in and out. Or you might say, that doesn't really work for us. The pick up and drop off time is a time when we're able to show photos of what the children have been learning during the day. And sometimes we even take video of what the children have been learning. And we use devices to do that. So we like to be able to show the families on devices about the children's day. So your policy might be that tech is really important at pick up and drop off time, but think about what your stance is and think about that so that you communicate those ideas with families so that everyone's on the same page, focusing on the relationships. The next section is about health and well-being, and that young children's health and well-being is actively supported in the digital context. Now, the Australian Government Department of Health sets out the following recommendation in the Australian Physical Activity and Sedentary Behaviour Guidelines, and that's that sedentary screen time should be no more than 1 hour in a total throughout the 24-hour period. Less is best. When preschoolers are sedentary, caregivers are encouraged to engage with them using activities such as reading, singing, puzzles, and storytelling. So what we're thinking about, that these guidelines come from the Department of Health. And the main point here is that we're concerned about sedentary time. So children being still. We want children to be active. We want young children to be moving, to be talking, to be physically active. We don't want them to be spending long periods of time sitting in one space. And the reason behind that is to do with concerns about posture. So you might have heard reference to tech neck, where you've got people who have got their phones and they're like this all the time and they're getting problems with their neck, problems with their back. Thinking about the way you set up your devices in your room and your tech in your room. So you can see the little fella in the middle up the top, sitting on the couch, really comfy. You can see he's sitting there on the couch. He looks comfortable. He's got the device there. because he's comfortable and in that position, he's probably going to be sitting there for a while. And you can see his head's down, so he might be getting issues with his neck. So thinking about other positions that you can put children in. Lying on their tummy is great. Think of tummy time for babies. You put them on their tummy so they can develop those lateral muscles and stretch their head up, support themselves and use their stomach and their back muscles. So thinking about if you're using devices, don't always have them on a table. Get them on the floor. You can see the little girl sitting with their legs apart with the tablet device in the middle. Take that tablet device away and put a puzzle or some toys there, and you would feel quite comfortable with her sitting on the floor. She's going to be moving and she's going to be developing other muscles. But even if you're using devices on a table, using a stand is great. So then you can see those little girls down the bottom there, their necks are in a nice neutral position because they've got a stand for the device. But even when the children haven't got a stand, you can see they naturally tend to pick up the devices. They're not using them flat, they are picking them up to use them. So think about when you offer children tech in your room, where you put it, how you put it, make it part of their play. Don't have it on a table that's stationary and then they go over and they get their dose of tech and then they come and do something else. Think about getting it off the table and into your play spaces. Are there any questions, Liz?
No? I didn't unmute myself. No questions about the presentation. It's all good. Someone had trouble with the hearing, but we've got that sorted out.
Okay, great. Thanks, Liz. The next item is citizenship. So young children's citizenship is upheld and fostered in digital contexts. So you've got to remember that not all children have equal access to tech at home. For some children, the early childhood setting may be their only access to tech. Now that might be around socioeconomic issues, it might be around personal philosophy of families, any of those sorts of things. So thinking about equal access, it's great in preschool because those tablet devices are a shared device. They're not a personal device or what sometimes is called a companion device. So when you're using things like tablet devices in the room, they belong to everybody and they're shared equally. Whereas when you're talking about things like mobile phones, they're a personal device or a companion device. They tend to belong to one person. Routinely ask children for consent to take and use their image. You must be doing this in preschool. Routinely asking children for consent. Don't sneak up on children and take their photo to send home. Don't sneak up on children and say, oh, but I just want to get an image of what they're doing. Ask them for consent. May I take your photo? You are working so hard on this. It would be great to show mum and dad what you've been doing. May I take your photo? You need to ask them for consent now. They need to grow up knowing that they must give consent for their image because they need it when they're teenagers. Teenagers have to know about consent for images and appropriate images that are used, and knowing that once images are on the internet, if you are using the internet, maybe you're sharing in-house and that's fine, but if you are posting images on the internet, they are always going to be there. So asking for consent to use their image. I'm not saying don't take photos of children, of course, but just letting them know and teaching them that that's what we do. We don't just take pictures of people and put them on the internet. So you're maintaining those conversations about internet safety, what it means to put your photos up, what it means to be using the internet. For many children, when they're using games, particularly free games that they might be using on the internet, there are pop-ups. So talking about pop-ups, what is a pop-up? What do you click when you see a pop-up? Not to click on the pop-up. So all of those sorts of things. And then when you are accessing apps and things within your preschool, try to turn the internet off. So using an app that doesn't require internet support the whole time so that they have the opportunity to be using it and regulating that use themselves without you constantly needing to look over their shoulder. And the final one is play and pedagogy. And play and pedagogy promotes young children's exploration, social interaction, collaboration, and learning in digital contexts. So model and instruct on the diverse functions of tablet devices. They use gyroscopes, there's cameras, there's microphones, there's all these fantastic touch buttons and things that you can do with tablet devices. So model them, get the children using them. Promote play that uses the digital alongside the hands-on. So making sure that your play spaces allow for that real blurring between digital play and traditional and hands-on play. Now you can see here that this teacher's put the tablet device on the hammering table. You might not feel quite comfortable doing that at this stage. Those children had been accessing these tablet devices all year, and the teacher felt quite confident putting them out. So they were doing a construction activity on the tablet device and then talking about that in their real life experience. And seek children's perspectives on the role of technology in their lives. What do they use tech for? They might be able to teach us some things because they're pretty smart little people. They might be using them to investigate ideas. They might use them to communicate with their families. They might use them to relax and watch things, and all of that's okay. So in the past, apps have been used as skill and drill, where children get their daily dose of technology and learning. And what we're going to look at now is an approach taken by the Australian government in the development of the ALA apps. Now, the ALA apps are the Early Learning Languages Australia apps, and they are play-based language learning program. When we're talking about language learning, we know that language is culturally based and it's interactive. And because this is a program for preschoolers, it needs to be play-based for educators to recognise it. Now, when these apps were developed, and this is why we're going to talk about them a little bit, because the interesting part is when they were developed, the experts in play and language got together to make sure that they included all models of play. So the children can use the apps to create their own combinations of play. And the pedagogical play framework of your preschool room is then reflected in the technology, and the technology becomes part of the learning environment. It's not something we do to the learners. Now, Professor Susan Edwards developed the pedagogical play framework, which became the play framework that was used in the development of these apps. Now, the apps must be play-based for early childhood teachers to recognise them, and each of the learning activities in the apps are based on one of the 3 play types. Now, we talk about open-ended play, modelled play, or purposely framed play, and you're probably really aware of these play types. But if anyone's got any questions, type them in and Liz will call them out. So we'll look at some examples of different play types and the ways you can extend the play within apps beyond tablets. So here, the children are really obviously engaging in open-ended play, the kind of play that we often see in preschool, that we watch, we observe, and we take our notes. They're using the toy animals. So you might be watching that play and you might be taking notes, and you might say, so I can see that one of the children there is really interested in tigers. So I might read that story I know about tigers. We might play a game. He's not drawing a lot, so maybe I'll take the tigers from the table over to the drawing table, and we might talk about drawing as well. All of those sorts of things that we just naturally do in preschool. By adding the tablet device, we introduce modelled play. So in this case, language is introduced. So what we might be seeing with the children playing with those animals is rah, 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 you know, I'm going to eat you, I'm hiding here, you know, that kind of zoo type play. When they've introduced the app, now we're introducing, you can see on the screen, there's a panda there, and the panda's asking for the types of food he would like, and he's telling the children what food he would like. And then the children are saying, well, let's see what the panda likes to eat, and they're offering different things. In this case, they're using a new language. So the tablet device is modelling a new language for them, a language other than English, and the children are then using that target language in their play in a way that's meaningful to them. It becomes part of their play. So rather than just rah, 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 I'm a tiger, let's see what their panda likes to eat, and then they're using different words in this new language to offer him the different foods. And then in this example, the children have discovered a hospital scene in an app. So the Polyglots at the Circus has a hospital scene. And then they asked if they could create that hospital at Kinder. So they drew on the resources that they understood to be available to recreate this purposefully framed play. So the app showed them this purposely framed play of an X-ray going over the body, and they're finding different things wrong with the character on the screen. There's their purposely framed play, and then the children have naturally extended that into open-ended play where they create that hospital play. Now you can see that all the play types are equally valued and can easily be included as you engage with the technology in your program. So the apps themselves incorporate different play types, and then you can extend and scaffold these ideas to meet the needs of your children and your programming style. I'll just keep looking at you, Liz, and so if you've got any question, you can just wave at me and I'll know you've got a question for someone. So we're going to have a look at a video, and this video looks at digital play pedagogy and ALA. So we're going to consider the following points: that tablet devices allow children to have experiences that they would not otherwise be able to access. And in this case, it's looking at language experiences and authentic language experiences. And we're talking about languages other than English here. But we're also going to look at the fact that digital play can broaden children's imagination. So we're not, when we introduce digital play, we introduce them to new ideas and new concepts, and then they can use that in meaningful ways. Now, we discovered that if I just turn the microphone around while I put the video on, we're hoping that the sound works okay for you. So let's see how we go.
After being involved in the development of the ALA apps, what I see that's really exciting in services is this really nice integration or porous relationship between the use of the apps within the iPads as the technology and the broader curriculum offerings. So some really exciting early examples that came from some of the trial centres, for example, when educators are making printouts and laminating them and putting them on sticks of the ALA characters and putting them in sound play for children, and then reporting that the children were naturally doing that role play with those characters and sticks in the target language. Or seeing really beautiful pedagogical examples from the Circus app. The little x-ray goes over the body parts and talks about the body parts. And then a really lovely example there where the children are then asking the teacher, oh, please can we have a doctor's setting because we need to be able to engage in this app. And so then what's come out that's so special or very, very exciting about the learning then from that integration of the technology and the play-based learning is a form of language learning that speaks to what the experts about language learning are telling us is one of the best ways for very young children to learn language, that it's authentic, that they're using the target language and that it's happening for a reason.
One of the great revolutions in learning is the arrival of technology. What the tablets and apps on tablets allow children to do is to play and learn at their own pace, in addition to being supported in group activities centred around the teacher or the educator in the room. And also it allows us to use new techniques and new ways of learning for children. So for instance, if they're able to record themselves and play back their own recording, that's going to be very powerful because they are curious to know what they sound like in another language, and they are curious about interacting with technology and the possibilities of technology. So certainly these new digital technologies like apps and tablets, they can only benefit the learning in the classroom setting.
Just put my mic back up here. So you can see, we saw there Susan Edwards and John Hayek that and the research that they've done into both language learning and the development of play. And Professor Susan Edwards based a lot of her study on the work of Lev Vygotsky. And Vygotsky said that the creative activity of imagination depends directly on the richness and variety of a person's previous experience, because this experience provides the material from which the products of fantasy are constructed. So the richer a person's experience, the richer the material of his imagination has access to. So this is why a child has less rich imagination than an adult, because he has less experience than an adult. So the richer we can make our preschool programs and the more we collaborate with the children to provide imaginative and creative learning spaces, the richer the children's experience will be. And you saw at towards the end of that video with the little boy, it looked like he was in a sort of space environment using the app. So that was a child who was having his second year when I was teaching. So he'd had 1 year at preschool and he deferred school entry and had a second year. The first year he was using the ALA apps and had access to them. And then the second year, early in the year, the first thing he saw was this rocket ship in one of the apps. So the year before we'd seen a cardboard rocket down at Aldi and we'd bought that, we'd made a rocket and that was all great fun. And he's like, well, we need a rocket so that we can play this app. But Aldi didn't have rockets anymore, so his family brought things in from home. His dad had accessed those air conditioning tubes, so we strung them up around the room. We needed to make the windows black. Someone brought in a bag of stones, so they were spread across the floor to make moon rocks. So you can see the tablet device was modelling this play experience, and then the children's whole imagination became involved in this creative play space that was developed. And he was able to lead that because he already had that experience that he could transfer to the other children. So let's look at some other examples. We're not going to look at extensions for every experience in every one of the Ella apps. And there are 7 Ella apps with 5 spaces in each one. So there's lots of different sorts of experiences that you can do with children. But we'll look at some of the rich imaginative play spaces that you can easily create with your children to scaffold the play from the concepts of the app. So for example, app 1 has this rocket experience that then you can use, and you can see the children using tablet devices within that space, be it like a creative play space with a tent type rocket or a cardboard rocket, whether it's creating rockets and using STEM-based learning, or whether it's small world play where they're using the tablet device alongside that small world rocket play. App 2, the polyglots go to the beach. So here's some examples of small world play, from the tabletop type experience with sand to boats and things, so fishing from boats, and using the tablet devices lying on boogie boards again, so you're getting the kids off the table and down on their tummies. Or maybe you're providing a beach sort of setting to use tablet devices, and you can see there the table set up with the palm tree and the tablet devices around the edge. So thinking about how you're going to create spaces where that digital technology can be used. And in this case, the children are learning about sea creatures and colours. So they're learning colours in another language and the words for sea creatures in another language while they use the apps and those creative play spaces. Think about putting your tablet devices in the home corner. So this is a great place. You can encourage collaboration and language interaction when the children pretend to make cakes or cooking. So in this experience, app 3, the polyglots at the birthday party, talks about numbers, and it's all about counting in a target language. So you can use those counting activities in other experiences, but it also looks at ingredients and making cakes. So you can see here where the children are using the tablet devices in their home corner in imaginative play, or where they're actually really making cakes and using some of the words and that modelled experience that they've seen in the tablet device in their real life experiences. And here we've got the polyglots at the zoo, where we again see those examples of open-ended play with animals and natural materials that then can be transferred from that modelled play from app 4, the polyglots go to the zoo, where they're giving modelled play about what sort of environments animals would like to live in, what sort of things we need to make animals comfortable. Do we need to add plants and rocks and water and all of those sorts of things the children have created here. They've also had the opportunity to start thinking about different cultures, where they're talking about the different places that these animals do live in and the environments that these animals would need to live. At 5, the polyglots at the circus has lots of circus ideas that you can develop with children, but the most obvious and engaging one, of course, is to create this hospital play, because it has a first aid helper tent. And then you can use the language of body parts, so talking about eyes and ears and nose and mouth, hands and legs, but in real play, where they're pretending to be doctors and setting up hospitals, and then using some of those words for these body parts in a new language. Think about taking your tablet devices outside. So you might be able to create a small outdoor room or just an area where devices can be used safely. You might have a veranda or a cubby house or a deck, or even just a little table that you could be used to define the space. So this one, app 6, the polyglots in the park, is all about words for movement and action. So naturally, it's great if teachers can get the tablet devices outside. And app 7, the polyglots in the town, looks at shapes and size. It might be that instead of imaginative play, you can place your tablet devices alongside constructive play areas to represent spaces like in the construction site of this app. So of course, these areas also represent socio-dramatic construction play, where the children talking and learning together. They're creating lifts, they're creating shops, they're building towns. So think about what the tablet devices will allow you to do with your children, considering these points when you're in relation to your own ideas about children using technology, so that digital play is social and it can be a really social collaborative experience. It can be used to broaden children's worldview, particularly when we're talking about introducing a new language and the culture of that language. And digital play also allows children to investigate new ideas. So we'll just watch this video.
Digital play is extended throughout the room. Usually we try and add things in that match the games just to enhance the learning. We had sand trays and the children were able to write in the sand, and that extended out into our playground as well, into the sand pit. We had children writing in the sand and showing us what they'd written. Egg and spoon race, we had actual egg and spoons in the room so the children could race each other while others were using the iPads. When we set up home corner and dramatic play areas that link with the ALA program, it definitely extends social and dramatic play skills.
To embed what is on the apps in the program, we've travelled with the apps and we just do it really gently, and it's built up to a point where it's just infiltrating every area of our program now. So it started with greetings, and then I think it was colours and numbers. It hasn't been an overwhelming thing because we've introduced each thing in sync with what's happening on the apps. We might say to hop or lompat, you need to use satu kaki. So we can actually use body parts and movement and numbers. And we just try and make sure that we use that language wherever possible. We already had the 2 devices, and I have to say their use hasn't always sat particularly comfortably with me, but there's a greater purpose when you're learning a language with the apps, and it makes me feel much more comfortable about using iPads with the children because there is a real sense of purpose behind their use.
The tablet devices are not isolating, they're collaborative with the children. They're placed in a position where all of them can either join in or they can sit there alone and do it if they like, but it's right there in amongst the group for everybody to get involved, parents as well. It's great. It started out not being quite a collaborative experience. I think the more children have had a go at the apps and the different games, I think they are then really interested. I'm finding now that they're sitting down with the 2 iPads together, quite possibly playing the same game, or even looking at a different one and then moving on to that one. So yeah, I think it's a lot more collaborative now, and we've actually got a lot more children who then sit around too, watching the other children on the ALA app.
The tablet devices let me include a language into my program, which is something I would never have done in the past, not even thought about doing. So being able to do that with the children and learn with them has been fantastic, and not just for me, for all our educators.
So hopefully you're starting to see digital technology as an integral part of your whole program. So yes, the actual devices are important. So think about how you set up the physical environment and the spaces where the children will access and use those tablet devices. How can you support cultural diversity? Can you use technology to access cultural resources that you wouldn't otherwise be able to have? So this might include YouTube clips of Japanese or African drumming, or you might be able to find clips of cultural games that you can then play with the children. Or you can access apps like the ALA apps, where you can introduce a new language with your children and a new language that you might not know yourself. Or you can access language that can be used in your whole groups, in your transition times. How are you going to encourage your children to use that language in their play? How do you connect with families? And where does the technology fit into your own philosophy and the philosophy and the policies of your service? Are there any questions, Liz?
Forget to unmute me. Yeah, it's just a one at the end. Keep going.
All right. So think about how you'll enrich the play spaces, what resources you'll provide. Devices can be used alongside other play areas. Responsive learning relationships are really strengthened as educators and the children learn together and share those decisions about the way the tablet devices can be used in the program. But you might be thinking, okay, that's all well and good, but sometimes children may need additional support to access the technology. So there are lots of devices and things that you might find work really well with some of your children, one of your children, or all of your children. And that's up to your personal philosophy about the way you use things like timers. So you might say, okay, well, we don't use timers for painting. We don't use timers when the children are playing with blocks. I don't want to use timers when the children are accessing the technology. I want them to learn to self-regulate. Or you might say, okay, well, I've got some children who just cannot regulate their own use of the tech. They really are going to need something like a timer and a visual timer. So particularly when we're talking about children on the autism spectrum, we know that those children are very drawn to the tablet devices. They're very safe and they're very predictable. So they make a fantastic learning tool for children on the autism spectrum, but it might be hard to get them off. So a visual timer is really good. A time timer, like you can see there, or a ticket timer, if you have children who need that auditory input, those time trackers and ticket timers make a sound as well. So they're great to use. And don't be frightened to use timers and model that regulation of timing the amount of time that children have on the device. And then they learn that when their time is up, they need to pass it on to somebody else. If you set up those really strong routines right from the start with your children, so when you introduce the technology, you introduce the timers alongside them, then that becomes part of the use. You might also like to introduce things like finish bags. And if you have children who are on the autism spectrum, you'll be very familiar with the finish symbol. So when an activity is finished, it goes in the finish bag. These sorts of bags are the perfect size for tablet devices. They can just slide straight in. When the timer's gone off, your turn has finished. It's finished, the tablet device goes in the finished bag. It's okay for me to give that to somebody else, but your turn has finished. And it's not negotiable. And that's the whole point, is that your routine's really strong and those ideas are not negotiable to try and help prevent the meltdowns that you might be seeing. So that hugger chair that you can see in the corner is great for kids who might be prone to having the meltdown. It hugs around the back, it hugs around the bottom, and it gives them that safe feeling and enclosed feeling. Also great if you want to be able to make sure that you're using tablet devices in a collaborative way, but you have children who are not yet comfortable having others sit really close to them. Maybe if they're in the chair, they'll feel more comfortable and more secure. Another thing to use might be a weighted cushion. So a weighted cushion like that can go over their knees while they're using the device, so that then when the time is finished, they're already feeling secure, ready to move on to the next thing rather than having a meltdown. So they can put that over their knees and sit the device on it or use it alongside it. The same with the disco sit there in red, or the disco wedge there that you can see. It gives them some wiggle room when they're sitting on that, and also provides that sensory input. So children who do require sensory input to focus are getting that from the seat, and then they're more inclined to be able to focus on what they're doing, or focus on when the time is finished to move on to something else. I should mention that finished comes in fabric. You can get the fabric from Spotlight and Lincraft. It also comes in rolls from the therapy store as contact. So you can contact shelves for things that are finished. You can contact boxes. Maybe you've got a box that you want to put your tech in to show that it's been finished. Schedule boards are great too. Now you might say, oh, I use schedule boards with all my children to show the day, or you might say, oh no, I only use schedule boards with some of my children. That's okay. It depends on what sort of program you're running and what your kids' needs are. You might want to just use a really simple schedule board like that with little felt ones from Boardmaker, and Boardmaker is free for a limited time when you log in. So if you want to get on and use Boardmaker, log in, print out as many things as you have before your time runs out for that. So you might have, okay, I know you don't love sensory experiences, but I really know you love using the iPad. So I'll put Sandpit first and then Paint, because they're not two things that you love, but I really want you to be doing. And then we can move on to the tablet device. But then you need something really engaging afterwards, or you'll get a meltdown. So after the tablet device, we're going to get out those ocean animals, you know, that new set of animals that you love, or maybe it's the Lego that someone really likes. So thinking about your schedule board, and they can take those off as they go through. You might have that just for an hour or so, and it might be replaced, or it might be that you only need them for certain times of the day. Another really simple one is just a first and then. So first you get to use the iPad and then you can do the puzzle. So then they just take those off and put them in their finished pocket and pop something else up to swap them over. So schedule boards, finished bags, timers, all of those things to help your children to self-regulate their tech use. And there's some references from that idea of using different sorts of technology in those play-based programs, if anyone's interested in further reading about tech in play. So Liz, you said there was a question?
Yes, Amanda, they were just saying, they want to say thanks. We've had some lovely things. They really love seeing how the iPad's been used purposefully in the program and love seeing the Ella in action. People want to say thanks very much. I want to know, I know that we're recording your session and it's going to be up on the ECTA website. Will the PowerPoint slides also be available?
So the PowerPoint slides, we haven't made them available, but we probably can. I can send them through to you, Liz, and they can be used as well. That's fine. And there's also will be the paper that's about it too. The Ella program is funded by the Australian government. It is free for all Australian preschools. It doesn't involve any cost because it's funded. The application is really easy. If you're interested in being part of the Ella program, you can just jump on the website and fill in an application form there to be part of it. The apps are all completely play-based, as you saw there, and they are a great introduction if you're not confident using technology with preschoolers and you want to know that there's something that's approved and it's safe. It doesn't require the internet. So while it needs the internet to download the apps, you do need to obviously download the apps from the internet using your unique login. But once you've downloaded them onto your tablet devices and you've set the children up with their avatars that also requires internet, then you don't need the internet. So you can allow the children to move the tablet devices around your room and you can set up creative play spaces for them to access the tablet devices with the internet turned off. So you know they're not going to be going into other apps that might have pop-ups and things, and you know they're not going to be going into YouTube or Googling things that they might not be supposed to be doing. You can relax a little bit more knowing that they're actually getting a really great modeled language experience to guide their play. And probably that's a really important thing. So you know you're doing something that's safe for the children and approved and a fantastic experience because it lets you introduce a language that you might not otherwise be able to do.
Wonderful. As I said, how does Ella go with children, ESL children or children who have delayed language?
Yeah, so that's a really great point. Children, we know that learning a new language helps other language. So if you have children that English is their second language and you might have families saying, oh, I'm a bit concerned about introducing a new language when they're just trying to learn English. Introducing more than one language does help their English skills as well, and they are going to be surrounded by English living in Australia. So maintaining their home language is really important, and you might be able to choose a language. There are 13 languages that you can choose for Ella, and you might like to choose a language that is the home language for some of your families to really make those families feel valued and included in your program. Or you might like to choose a language that nobody speaks, that's new for everybody, so that everybody's learning together. There's no right or wrong to the languages that you choose. Obviously, all languages are valued and important. Was there a second part to that question that I've forgotten?
Or children have delayed language.
Delayed language. Now, that's a really interesting point. We have shown speech pathologists. So when I was teaching using the apps in a preschool room, we had some children who were speech delayed and seeing speech pathologists. And their concern at the start was they don't want to see the children being corrected, because that's their job, obviously, and that's what they train us in when they come to see our children. They give us techniques in guiding children through speech. But when they looked at the Ella apps and they said, so the children have the opportunity to hear the recording of their own speech and they're being modelled speech, but there's no right or wrong. So there's no tick, there's no ding, 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 you got it right. It just moves on. And they were saying, well, this is fantastic because it's giving the children the opportunity to hear somebody else speak and really give them that focused listening skills to sounds that I couldn't otherwise be offering, because a speech pathologist cannot work with a child for hours on end. They get tired and it's very draining for young children, whereas using a tablet device feels very safe, and they're more likely to go in and have that repeated experience over and over. So they're hearing the sounds and they're making formations with their mouths, they're listening really carefully, so it's improving their listening skills, and they're getting the opportunity to make sounds and then hear those sounds being played back in a really safe, secure way. They haven't got someone sitting opposite them, you know, telling them what to do, so they can experiment a little bit more, and it really helps with their language development.
Thanks. Naomi wants to know, as a relief teacher, could she have access to the Ella apps on a device she takes with her into her classrooms?
Oh, wouldn't that be great? Unfortunately, preschools register for the program. So the preschool must have their service approval numbers checked with the CEQA, and the provider numbers and all of that sort of thing. The idea is that because it does collect data on the children that can be accessed by the early childhood teacher, and we are very mindful of data and how it is stored. So that data is stored on Australian shores. It's only accessed with the login by the teacher or the other educators at that service. And we encourage children to keep their devices locked up in the evenings. And if a device goes missing or something happens to a device, we encourage them to change their password immediately. And that's to protect the data of the children. Any Australian preschool can register for Ella, so any preschool can have that Ella program in their service, and then as a relief teacher, if they have access to it, you would be able to go in and use that with the kids. But no, while it would be fantastic to be able to have it in your handbag and be able to pull it out when you go to a service, and I could really see the value of that, at this stage, no, for security and privacy, it's not available.
Right, Angela wants to know, can you give us some more details about Boardmaker so they can look it up?
Oh, just Google Boardmaker. Just comes up as a Google. When you log in, you're asked to set up your user identification and all that sort of thing, so your email and all that, and you have it free for, I think it's a month. You get it free. So I would suggest going in when you know you've got a month that you've got time, and creating as many resources as you can in that time while it's still free, because after that you just need to pay for your subscription.
Thanks. They want to know, does Ella have a program for English as one of the languages for use by the ESL students?
We would love that too. At the moment, so the original project for Ella was to encourage learning an additional language, because we know that there was a decline in the number of students that were studying languages right through to year 11 and 12. And that there was a decline over the last few years, and also Australia is well behind other countries in the amount of children that study languages. So this was exciting because it gave us this push up. So it was introduced at preschool in the hope that then children would become interested and more engaged and see language learning as a fun, exciting, normal part of living in Australia, and then encourage language learning in later life. So this project itself is about learning an additional language, but yes, we do see how it would be really beneficial for students with ESL, or even in schools with special needs. We often think, oh, wouldn't it be fantastic to just encourage language learning, and that because it's that really safe modelled language that comes through, and play-based language, wouldn't it be great to have it in English? But at this stage, no, the idea is about learning an additional language.
Does anyone else have questions for Amanda? I just got asked, is it available for kindergartens as well? That's where the focus is, isn't it, Amanda?
Yeah, it's for, so when we talk about preschool, we use the word preschool because it's a national program, and preschool is a national term. So for Queensland, kindergarten. So anyone with a kindy tick, if you're running a kindy program, be it standalone, attached to a private school as a early learning centre, or in a long daycare centre, but as long as you're a kindy program registered with the CEQA, then you can be part of the program. Yep, and you can register at any time. You don't have to wait till the start of the year. You can register partway through the year. You probably wouldn't use all the apps in the second half of the year, but then you'd have them ready for the next year.
Does anyone else have any questions for Amanda? You can use your space bar and hold it down and ask her questions direct. She said, oh, and Angela just said in the chat box, thanks Amanda, I'm using Ella program with her class, learning French. They've set up home corner with berets, play croissants and other foods. The children have used the French greetings and sing songs in the language as well.
Oh, I love it. I love hearing things about that. Thanks, Angela. And often when we're doing things like this, we tend to talk about the apps and talking about that digital play, but it's really important to think about the culture of the language that people choose as well. So thinking about those French aspects that you can include in your play space, that's great.